Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, July 13th, 2021. Ready for another show? I am, I guess. I don't know. I'm here. You're here. Doesn't that make it our time? Yes, it is. Welcome to your time, our time. Bill running a little bit late, apparently, this morning. He's got the tweet out, but I just thought, oh, well, I can always rely on... No, just kidding. Just rely on Bill for the first couple minutes of the show, and he just tweets, hey, I'm running late. Oh, my God. I'll just say, all right, let's go. Let's launch the show. Here's Kagro X, and I'm here. I have some stories for you, stuff to share. Today's Tuesday. That means we get Joan McCarter sharing stuff at the end of the show during our 10:30 segment. Can we wait that long? I don't know if we can hold out that long. Congress mostly back and in session. The Senate back and allegedly working towards an agreement on a reconciliation package. So that's good news. Everything seems to be on track, but you never know with these weirdos in Congress whether or not they're going to let this thing go through. But we'll catch up on some of that, discuss that, I am sure, with Joan. I feel like last week I ended things by saying we have to remember to discuss something in particular with Joan that was going on, and I immediately knew that I would forget whatever that was, and true to form I have, so I was right. Once again, last week when I said I wouldn't remember. But maybe I didn't say it at all. Maybe checking the tape will reveal that to be a false memory. And I've gotten nowhere. Plenty to round up today, as usual. And thinking off into the future. Plenty, let me see. I certainly put a couple of stories together. And then my eye was just grabbed by headline at the top of the front page over at Daily Kos, Mark Sumner writing. That always gets my attention as well. Trump Organization says Alan Weisselberg is no longer CFO, so everything's just peachy now. I guess you can stop prosecuting them now. Is that the idea? I don't know whether... it is possible that Donald Trump really does think like that. Well, if we fire the guy as CFO, then you got to stop your criminal case against the Trump Organization because there's no more problems anymore. Of course, it might not occur to him that these things already happened, and so there's really not much that you can do about it. We're going to prosecute you for it. If you fire the guy on top of our prosecuting you for it, well, that's just icing on the cake as far as we're concerned. Oh, look, the news is that Joan McCarter remembers what we were going to talk about. I should have just said, well, she'll remember and she'll bring it to our attention when she gets here. But we wouldn't have to wait for her to get here. Judges, that's right. It was something exciting and something that she'd been writing extensively on, and we didn't have time for last week. And the judges haven't gone anywhere, so she remembers. She's still writing about it, so that helps. Great. Now we have that to look forward to. And in the meantime, one of the judges, I guess, that's already been appointed, although this would be a state judge, I think, is sitting in this case against the Trump Organization. I'm kind of curious about what's going on over there. Let's read up on that. On Monday, the Trump Organization announced that indicted Chief Financial Officer Alan Weisselberg was now just former Chief Financial Officer Alan Weisselberg, not even a coffee boy anymore. The longtime CFO is also off the paperwork at most of the other Trump companies, including Trump's hotels and golf clubs. Weisselberg's name has also been given a coat of whiteout at the ridiculous assortment of Trump companies which are used to shuffle around the money for other Trump companies, such as the Trump Payroll Corporation, which was the company used for passing along the perks that got Weisselberg indicted in the first place. All right, that will help nothing, but it's interesting to see. According to the Washington Post, this means that the removal of Weisselberg's name from these corporate filings could avoid questions from regulators, lenders, or vendors by leaving out the name of an indicted executive. I guess if they're looking to initiate loans or business deals now at this point, it can only help with that, I guess, if it helps at all. Everyone will know, of course, Isn't this where that indicted guy used to work? Because actually you're indicted. Anyway, it seems a little bit like saying that the James gang could skip all those bank robbery investigations if Frank took his name off the letterhead. As CNN notes, the until yesterday CFO was just indicted for allegedly running a 15-year tax fraud scheme at all those Trumpian companies. It seems unlikely that any of those regulators, lenders, or vendors are going to forget about that at any time in the next, say, 5 to 10 years, especially since it seems highly unlikely that Weisselberg is going to be the last officer at the Trump Organization to face consequences for treating financial law as optional. As NBC News reported back at the beginning of the month, the 15-count indictment against Weisselberg is indicative of two things. The other 13 counts are for show, I guess, but it's indicative of two things taken together. The now former CFO seems not ready to flip at the moment, and this is highly unlikely to be the end of the investigation underway by Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance, but the fact that Weisselberg is currently pleading not guilty isn't an absolute sign that he's locked in position. It's a sign that Weisselberg and Weisselberg's attorneys know that he's not the end game of this investigation. Since Vance and a number of other investigations are really aimed at the guy whose golden letters are over the door, there's no point in trying to make a deal too early. Weisselberg's team will sit back for the moment and see what Vance produces on his own. If it becomes clear that Vance absolutely needs the just ousted CFO's help to nail down charges against Trump, then Weisselberg will be in an excellent position to bargain away the indictments he's currently facing. If it starts to sound like Vance might pull up a net full of Trumps on his own, expect Weisselberg's attorneys to be on the horn immediately, looking to spill while what he has to sell still holds value. In any case, the change in Weisselberg's role at the Trump Organization appears to be nothing but a transparent effort to put a pretense of distance between the company and the guy facing 15 counts of tax fraud. Weisselberg isn't actually leaving the company, and it seems that his actual role isn't really changing beyond where his name appears on the paperwork. The only evidence that Weisselberg should be worried is a statement that came from the other guy on July 1st, "I'm with him all the way." Well, you know that usually means doom. Well, let's see. This all, of course, makes it worth setting the Wayback Machine to 2018, when Trump loudly defended Michael Cohen as someone I have always liked and respected, and as someone who would not flip on him despite the horrible witch hunt and the dishonest media. And that all turned out so well for Cohen and, of course, Trump himself. But as NBC News makes clear, the fact that the first set of indictments made by Vance didn't include a laundry list of charges aimed at Trump may be disappointing, but it's an indication of an investigation that's proceeding in a way that is very carefully crossing the T's and dotting every I. We hope so. If the evidence is there of Trump's direct involvement in the fraud and disdain for legal governance, it seems to be the hallmark of the Trump Organization, it will likely come forth in time. On the other hand, Trump didn't employ Weisselberg for nothing. On paper, at least, the 500-plus entangled corporations, many of which have, or at least had, Weisselberg occupying the same CFO role, may actually make it difficult to find Trump's signature in a spot where he is clearly knowingly approving an illegal act. As Cohen made clear during his testimony to Congress, Trump was very good at making clear to underlings what he wanted them to do while not saying it outright. Alan Weisselberg may not be ready to flip at the moment, but somewhere he and his attorneys better be building a very thick dossier of what they have to offer when the time comes, because there's no one left at Pennsylvania Avenue who's going to see that the ex-CFO gets a nice, fast pardon. Unless we, I guess, find out definitively the answer to whether or not Trump was a believer in the idea of leaving behind secret pardons that could be unsealed at the last possible moment, even when he was no longer president. I'm almost interested in seeing whether he actually tries that or not, but I prefer to think of it as everybody's going to jail if you haven't had your pardon already. So, okay, we have that to look forward to. Definitely something to keep tabs on. I want to catch up on a few other items as well, things in pocket and floating around on Twitter this morning, but saving that one for you. Let's see. Other news. There is yet another book, still not entitled. I'm still waiting for somebody to use the title. Just Trump Sucked, and here's why. But essentially the same thing. Everybody now, I guess, having covered him for 4 years and having discovered just how widely he'd be willing to depart from the law, or how often he'd be willing to depart from the law, and his disdain for understanding the role he was in, etc., etc. Now all coming out in book form. This a continuing 10-year plus trend for the Washington press corps, and it's really quite disturbing at this point. Although I certainly don't feel like people weren't telling us that he sucked at the time, but I don't know. And some of these details, I guess, only come out in the end because they only get people to spill the beans when it's all over. But here we go. We're in for another one. The Washington Post excerpts the first parts of this under the headline today of "I Alone Can Fix It" book excerpt. Apparently that's the title of the book, is "I Alone Can Fix It," of his, I guess, infamous 2016 campaign, quote, "I Alone Can Fix It" book excerpt, ready now, inside Trump's election day and the birth of the, quote, big lie. I think it was probably born before then, but that's not really what we're here to dispute today. At the end of a tumultuous day, the subheader begins, the defiant president, he's a maverick, the defiant president refused to accept the signs that he was losing the White House contest to Joe Biden. I won in a landslide, and they're taking it back, Trump told advisors. Before I dive in, because this looks to be a extensive piece, and I guess we'll have to make some decisions about how much of it we'll actually read through, I will share with you, I'm going to have to move this into another column, I guess, share with you the tweet that brought it to my attention, which means the excerpt that most interested the person sending the tweet, the sender here in this case, Ryan Goodman. Many of you may follow him on Twitter. That's where the comment was made. Former special counsel at the Department of Defense, co-editor-in-chief currently of Just Security, so we hear his name quite frequently, professor at NYU Law School. And I guess the part that moved him to excerpt from the article was this, that Defense Secretary Esper, speaking on the record in this, in the book, and an excerpt, and I guess that's why he's interested in it. Again, Goodman, a former special counsel to the Department of Defense. Defense Secretary Esper, quote, repeatedly told his deputies that he wanted this election to be indisputably clear who had won. He had feared that anything less might give Trump some shred of a reason to call out troops. So apparently that a very real fear among people, I guess, who felt some responsibility to the nation, but who also served during the Trump administration. So let's take a look at the excerpting in the Washington Post here. Oh, no, I'm going to have to do it this way and click on it this way in order to get to the full piece here. All right, let me see. As I'm scrolling, yeah, it's looking like this is going to be an extensive thing. But all right, let's take a look at it. We might as well. It's of interest this morning. This is part one of an excerpt from "I Alone Can Fix It, Donald J. Trump's Catastrophic Final Year." That's the full title of the piece from Carol Leonig and Philip Rucker. That's actually the title of the book, rather, that they wrote, and they're doing obviously they get the byline on the excerpt today, focusing on the election, where I really would like to go further back, but you'll just have to get the book, I suppose. By the way, the cover photo illustrating the book is Trump peeling off the mask that he wore after his, I guess, triumphant / shuffling return from the hospital from Walter Reed, where after he contracted the coronavirus and made sure to scramble all the resources of the federal government to get him the latest and greatest miracle cures, which he, of course, then promised to every vulnerable senior in America, and basically did nothing to deliver. 400,000 plus people dead since then, and an additional, 28 million infected, but never mind all of that. Finally, Election Day had arrived. We're going to skip forward to the election here. The morning of November 3rd, 2020, President Trump was upbeat. The mood in the West Wing was good. Some aides talked giddily of a landslide. Several women who worked in the White House arrived wearing red sweaters in a show of optimism, while some Secret Service agents on the president's detail sported red ties for the occasion. Trump's voice was hoarse from his mad dash of rallies, but he thought his exhausting final sprint had sealed the deal. By the way, I think just temporarily, I wish that his exhausting final sprint had in fact sealed the deal, but it didn't kill him, so we were all disappointed to see that. He considered Joe Biden to be a lot of things, but a winner most definitely was not one of them. "I can't lose to this effing guy," Trump told aides. Well, you did. Around noon, his detail whisked Trump across the Potomac River to visit his campaign headquarters in Arlington, where campaign manager Bill Stepien and the senior leadership briefed Trump in the conference room. Stepien outlined what to expect that night, when polls closed in each battleground state, how quickly votes would be tallied, and which states would probably have the first projected winners. He explained that because of the huge number of mail-in ballots in many states, it might take long into the night for the votes to be counted. Patience was in order. So, in other words, it was all laid out for him, and he said, to hell with that, this is what we're going to do. Stephen explained to Trump that in many battleground states, the first votes to be recorded were expected to be in-person Election Day votes. Like, duh, we all knew that. Which could lean Trump, while mail-in votes, which were likely to be heavily in favor of Biden, would be added to the tally later as those ballots were processed. This meant that the early vote totals could well show Trump ahead by solid margins. "It's going to be good early," Stepien told the boss, but as he cautioned the president, the numbers would be incomplete and the margins probably would tighten later in the evening. Trump then stepped out of the conference room and into the big open floor of cubicles to give a brief pep talk to scores of assembled staffers who greeted him with raucous applause. A pool of journalists stood nearby to cover his remarks, and a reporter asked whether he had prepared an acceptance speech or a concession speech to deliver that evening. "No, I'm not thinking about concession speech or acceptance speech yet," Trump said. Of course, if he knew what either of those things meant, he probably would have said, no, I don't make concession speeches. But he didn't know, so he just repeated the question back. Hopefully we'll be only doing one of those two. And winning is easy. Losing is never easy. Not for me, it's not. And of course you're going to be doing one of those two, not both. But I think, benefit of the doubt, normalizing his speech, will say he meant we're going to be doing one of them, which is the acceptance speech. We don't do the other kind. Anyway, as Trump thought about winning or losing, the Pentagon brass was focused on keeping the peace. That morning, Defense Secretary Mark T. Esper, General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and other defense officials were briefed about security concerns around the nation. If Trump won, officials expected large crowds of protesters to assemble in Washington, perhaps as many as 10 or 15,000 people. Law enforcement officials were monitoring cities, including Atlanta, Boston, Los Angeles, Norfolk, Philadelphia, and San Diego for likely protests. Norfolk, really? Okay. Meanwhile, White House cooks and ushers were busy preparing to receive hundreds of guests for an election night viewing party. Trump's original plan had been to stage his, quote, victory party at the Trump Hotel a few blocks away, but that plan had been scotched a few days earlier because, COVID, and his big plan for the celebration there ran into the district's public health regulations. And amazingly, he felt like he couldn't get around that somehow, so he went around the other part of the law that he felt he could ignore. Trump's campaign and his White House political team had the nearly 400 people they wanted to invite for election night, so they moved the party to the White House, which is on federal property and therefore not subject to local ordinances. But the choice of location broke with a solemn tradition anyway. of never using the White House for overt political purposes, a norm Trump had already tossed aside in August by delivering his Republican National Convention acceptance speech from the South Lawn. Trump also used the White House to house his political operation, setting up 2 war rooms with computers, large screen televisions, and other equipment where campaign staffers would monitor election returns. The larger of the 2 war rooms was in government office space at the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, which is next to the West Wing and part of the White House campus, where roughly 60 staffers would have workstations from which to receive up-to-the-minute information from battleground states and track precinct data. The smaller war room was in the map room on the ground level of the White House residence. Steeped in history, the map room took its name from World War II when President Roosevelt turned it into a situation room with maps to track troop movements and to receive classified information on the war's progress. Trump's most senior aides planned to work through the night in the map room, now transformed into the campaign's command center, where Stepien and his top deputies could analyze data and stay close to the president to brief him in person as needed. It was never needed because he doesn't understand the information anyway, but you know how it goes. This and other episodes recounted in this book are based on hundreds of hours of interviews with more than 140 people, including the most senior Trump administration officials, friends, and outside advisors to the 45th president. This is actually the part that's not juicy and revealing, but records their methodologies. And in fact, we'll just move on to the next bit of the excerpt. This is somewhat interesting. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi had been working toward this night for 4 years. For her, election night in 2016 had been a nightmare, and she was determined not to allow a repeat in 2020. That night was like getting kicked in the back by a mule over and over again, she said in an interview. I don't know how often she's been kicked by mules at all, but whatever. The California Democrat recalled thinking that night about Trump's surprise victory. It can't be true. It can't be happening to our country. We all felt that way anyway. Pelosi added, "You understand that this is not a person of sound mind. You understand that. You know that. He's not of sound mind. When he first got elected, I was devastated because I thought Hillary Clinton was one of the best prepared people to be president. Better than her husband. Better than Obama. Better than George W. Bush." This is interesting. Maybe not better than George Herbert Walker Bush, because he had been a vice president. I don't think any of the other people I just mentioned would deny, though, that she was better qualified, better experienced, all the rest of it. So the idea that he would get elected was shocking. It was shocking. True. Now switch over to Mitt Romney, who had been less shocked by Trump's election. He had watched firsthand as the Republican Party was radicalized by the far right, but was just as determined to prevent a second Trump term. The senator from Utah, this is interesting, said in an interview that as he watched the election returns in California with his wife, Ann, son, Craig, and other family members, and felt a pit in his stomach. The early numbers looked surprisingly good for Trump. Biden was struggling in the quadrennial bellwether of Florida, even in Democrat-rich Miami-Dade County. "I think he's going to win," Romney recalled telling his family. "Those polls were way off. I think he's going to pull it out." Well, of course, that was a bad prediction, but I understand the feeling of doom. But I just wanted to note again for the record. I mean, I know he wasn't going to pull up his tent stakes and sell everything in California because he doesn't have to. He was an automatic given for the Senate in Utah. But just, I mean, are any listeners in Utah that aren't, I guess that wouldn't already, probably nobody that would be shocked to find out that the senator from Utah actually really lives in California. I think that was probably understood even when they elected him. Anyway, at the White House, people liked what they were seeing. There was a party atmosphere. Staff hung out in the West Wing offices chatting until at least 9 p.m. Woo-wee, late. National Security Council officials celebrated in the Roosevelt Room. White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows served beer and food in his corner office. I'm sure he wasn't serving it. There was beer and food in his corner office, and people came there and ate it. Another group of aides lingered outside White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany's office, known as Upper Press, in the residence. Scores of guests, cabinet secretaries, members of Congress, television stars, and other dignitaries were drinking and milling around, mostly without masks, of course, save for HHS Secretary Alex Azar, who kept his on. After a few too many swigs of wine and beer, some guests became rather animated as the night progressed. Upstairs, in the first family's private quarters, Trump was glued to the television. Of course he was. He alternated between watching from his bedroom alone and from a family room with Melania, with other family members and some of his most trusted aides, including Hope Hicks. How does she do it? Watched in his bedroom in the family room with Hope Hicks. It wasn't family. Senior advisors, including Stepien, Meadows, McEnany, Jason Miller, the rapist, Stephen Miller, the Nazi, and Ronna McDaniel, the crypto Romney, were in the map room. Members of the president's family, Don Jr., Ivanka, Jared, Eric, and his wife Lara, who worked on the campaign, came in and out much of the night, as did a pair of special party guests, Fox News stars Laura Ingraham and Jeanine Pirro. So in case you were wondering when we were going to get to the part about too many swigs of wine and beer, we're there now. Okay. Almost time for our first break here. So actually nothing super surprising, but setting the scene. Maybe that means we'll have to read a little bit more when we're done with the break. They all turned to Matt Oskowski perhaps, for updates, sometimes as often as every few minutes. What's happening now? What about now? He's the data cruncher. Oskowski sat in front of a computer and performed real-time analysis of precinct data to stay ahead of state calls and spot any trouble on the horizon. All that very interesting. I think really what we should be getting to before we cut out. One Trump confidant who stayed mostly out of the map room was Rudy Giuliani, who set up his own camp with his son Andrew, who worked then at the White House, inviting all the athletes to come and have fast food, right? Staring intensely at his laptop, watching vote tallies as people milled about, and then we'll tell you exactly what made his scene so odd right after this break. Well, he was in it. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back down to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Here we go. We'll drive back into the book excerpt, although I think, if we kept reading, we could read all day long until Joan got here. And then she might even ask us to continue reading. But I think we'll set it aside after we get through this next part. This is about as far as I've been able to scan. But Giuliani now enters into the picture. And I guess this is where we begin to really find out, okay, what's going on with the mindset inside the White House that night. It doesn't really matter where the beer was being kept, right? Okay, so Giuliani sat at a table in the Red Room with his son Andrew, who worked at the White House in the Office of Public Liaison, staring intensely at a laptop, watching vote tallies. What's his Christiane Allen there with him? I'm not really sure. Doesn't say here. The Giulianis made for an odd scene as partygoers swirled around them. After a while, Rudy Giuliani started to cause a commotion. I guess his hair started melting and running down his face, and he started getting all bug-eyed. He was telling other guests that he had come up with a strategy for Trump and was trying to get into the president's private residence, his private quarters, to tell him about it. That's sort of interesting and revealing all by itself. Like, even at this point, Rudy Giuliani doesn't have the clout to be able to push his way into the private residence. I don't know if anybody ever does, really. But certainly he would think that he would. But this is the interesting part about it. He's trying to get himself in there. But some people thought Giuliani may have been drinking too much and suggested to Stepien that he go talk to the former New York mayor. Stepien, Meadows, and Jason Miller took Giuliani down to a room just off the map room to hear him out. Remember, they're bringing him there at this point because people are like, well, he says he has a plan, but I think he might be drunk. Which is really remarkable in itself. I mean, I think we all knew that Giuliani was a bit of a drinker anyway, but I'm just imagining the scene that the launch of the let's do the big lie thing comes in the middle of Giuliani, I guess, crafting it as a strategy, drunk in front of everybody. I guess it's at this point not a shocker, but anyway, there it is. So they bring him to the room off of the map room and say, all right, drunk ass, what's going on here? What's happening in Michigan? He asked. I don't know if that's how he sounded when he did it. They said it was too early to tell. Votes were still being counted, and they couldn't say. Just say we won. Giuliani, that's not Jeanine Pirro I'm doing. That's Rudy Giuliani. Just say we won, Giuliani told them. Same thing in Pennsylvania. Just say we won Pennsylvania, Giuliani said. Giuliani's grand plan, and really, that's a good way of putting it. The big genius of America's mayor. Giuliani's grand plan was to just say Trump won. But we knew that already. That's why people already discussed that as being the plan a long time ago. The best that drunk-ass Giuliani can come up with, after everybody's been writing articles for weeks that, what are we going to do when Trump just says he won because the vote totals aren't finished yet? How will we handle that? Giuliani, I got a great idea. Why don't we just say Trump won? So there's I guess that's what happens when the shoe polish seeps into your brain. So that's it. Just say Trump won, state after state, based on nothing. Stepien, Miller, and Meadows thought his argument was both incoherent and irresponsible. They're like, no, I didn't agree with that from the start. I spent the next 6 months dedicating my life to that. But right then and there, I was like, no. We can't do that, Meadows said, raising his voice. We can't. Okay. By the way, at this point, the piece is illustrated with a photo of, let me read you the caption. A note saying, quote, One Texas, like W-O-N, Texas. And there's nothing else on the page. One Texas is seen on the podium moments after Trump spoke at the White House on November 4th. Trump named states he had won and then claimed that he had won states that were too close to call, including Georgia and North Carolina. That's the caption of this thing. But it's a close-up of the president's side of the podium. And by the way, I mean, again, he's going to stand there and make the claim that he won the state of Texas. So he's there with a note that says, One Texas on it. He had to write that down in Sharpie and in his all caps handwriting, and you know how that goes. I just find that interesting. So, some competitive races were falling into place for the Republicans. In South Carolina, Lindsey Graham faced a tough challenge from Democrat Jamie Harrison. This actually not really revelatory. I always ruin that word here either, except for maybe the interesting comments that passed between the two of them. Trump was watching TV as news networks projected Graham's victory, and within minutes he called his friend. You got yours, Trump told Graham. I've got a fight on my hands. So there's some pleasantries that then pass between them, but he's dejected. He can't be happy for his friend. He calls and commiserates, even though there's no misery on Graham's behalf here. So let's see. There's more from other people who were milling about that day, saying that they knew the real truth and thought they were going to lose. Bill Barr was there. He showed up for the election night party, even though he had thought, it says, for months that Trump was destined to become a one-term president. Trump didn't seem to be able to get out of his own way and deliver a disciplined message. He hung around the party for a bit, but after 10 p.m. decided to call it a night, went home and got some sleep. Now, the military guys, the Pentagon's top two leaders, stayed away from Trump's party, still hyper-vigilant about avoiding any suggestion that they were politicizing the military. Esper and Milley had learned that lesson back on June 1st in Lafayette Square. But now, of course, the courts say, don't worry about it. There's no lesson to be learned. Milley watched the returns on TV from his home in Fort Myer in Arlington. A history buff, Milley memorialized the night by keeping his own scorecard of states in his journal. Around 10:30 p.m., with results from most key states still far too close to call, Milley received an interesting call from a retired military buddy who reminded him of his apolitical role as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. There's some pleasantries. He says, remember your loyalties to the Constitution, not any people. He says he knew that. This is interesting. Milley's friend added, there's fourth-rate people at the Pentagon, and you have fifth-rate people at the White House. You're surrounded by total incompetence. Hang in there. Hang tough. Esper was at home in Northern Virginia, feeling at peace that he had survived this long without getting fired and without having acquiesced to Trump's wishes to order troops to break up domestic protests. The defense secretary had had a target on his back all fall, but Trump had not axed him. Esper had a scare the night before, November 2nd, when NBC's Courtney, I don't know how she pronounces it. Is it Cube? Courtney Kubi? K-U-B-I. I don't watch enough TV news to know. She planned to report that he was preparing to be fired, Esper, that is, the day after the election. And he had updated his resignation letter and was quietly advising members of Congress about renaming Army bases named for Confederate generals as a sort of mic drop to fortify his legacy. You remember that period of time. Esper believed that if NBC published the story, it would signal that he was on the verge of resigning and prompt his premature firing, so he raced to stop it. He directed his aides to try to convince NBC that the information could be overhyped. It was true that Esper had been consulting with congressional committees about renaming the bases. It was also true that he had prepared a resignation letter, as many Trump appointees had, but he had no imminent plans to submit it. In truth, Esper expected that Trump would fire him after the election, but was hoping to hold on if he could, at least for a few days after the election. He was worried about what Trump might try to do with the military if he were not at the helm. Only this guy can fix it this time. Esper warned Kubi, I have no idea who that person is, that publishing her story could result in a more compliant acting Secretary of Defense, which could have worrisome repercussions. The story was held as they tussled back and forth. Esper was a lifelong Republican and had worked at the Conservative Heritage Foundation, as well as for Republican Senators Bill Frist and Chuck Hagel, but he told his closest colleagues that as he watched TV news anchors cover the election results, he found himself rooting for the Democrat. Esper had worked with Biden and his Secretary of State in waiting, Anthony Blinken, when he was a senior staffer on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He had confidence that they were serious, stable people who cared deeply about shoring up national security. Esper couldn't say the same about Trump. In fact, Trump had privately indicated that he would seek to withdraw from NATO and to blow up the U.S. alliance with South Korea should he win re-election. When those alliances had come up in meetings with Esper and other top aides, some advisors warned Trump that shredding them before the election would be politically dangerous. Yeah, the second term. We'll do it in the second term, Trump had said. That's great. So, standard operating procedure for Trump, of course, hide the ball until, after the election if the idea comes up too close to it. But then again, it's something he hinted at all along. So I guess we couldn't really say that it was going to come as a surprise to anybody. All right, I think we're going to drop this at this stage, even though maybe the juiciest stuff is yet to come, with Trump reacting to the news being announced on Fox. For instance, the call in Arizona, I think, prompts this here. Trump, who had been watching Fox, was livid. He could not fathom that the conservative news network he had long considered an extension of his campaign, I wonder why, was the first news organization to call Arizona for Biden. This was a betrayal. His top advisors, who had been in the map room at the time, rushed upstairs to see the president. Giuliani, I guess finally seeing people blocking for him, followed them. They're calling it way too early, Oskowski told Trump. But, It was what it was. This thing is close. We still think we'll win narrowly, and not just us. Doug Ducey's modeling people show us winning. Ducey, Arizona's Republican governor, and his political team had kept in close contact with Trump's aides. That hardly reassured the president. Ready for this? What the F, and they print it here in the Post as, F dash dash dash. What the F is Fox doing? Trump screamed. Then he barked orders to Kushner. Now he's serious. He's talking to Jared. Call Rupert. Call James and Lachlan. And to Jason Miller, go rape somebody. But he actually said, get Salmon, S-A-M-M-O-N. I don't even know who that is. Get Hemmer, one of the, Hemmer I recognize. Is Salmon, one of the Fox anchor guys. They've got to reverse this. The president was referring to Fox owner Rupert Murdoch and his sons, we know that, as well as Bill Salmon. Thank you for telling me who he is, the top news executive at Fox. Trump's tirade continued, and he gets creative here. More Fs, right? What the F, he bellowed. What the F are those guys doing? How could they call this early? Skowski again tried to soothe the president. They're calling this way too early. He said, this is unbelievable. Except it was right. Giuliani now, I guess, gets his moment, pushed the president to forget the Arizona call and just say he won. Step into the East Room and deliver a victory speech. Never mind that Meadows had earlier snapped at Giuliani. He was too drunk to remember that, I'm sure, and said the president couldn't just declare himself the winner. Just go declare victory right now, Giuliani told Trump. You got to declare victory now. Giuliani's interjection of this just say you won strategy infuriated Trump's campaign advisors, who then suddenly all went along with it for the next year of their lives. It's hard to be the responsible parent when there's a cool uncle around taking a kid to movies and driving him around in his Corvette, one of the advisors recalled. The guy with the melting hair polish in his, running down his face is the cool uncle in this, by the way. When we say the president can't say that, being responsible is not the easiest place to be when you've got people telling the president what he wants to hear. It's hard to tell the president no. It's not an enviable place to be. Well, that's normally the case with a normal president. But when crazy a-hole is president, I guess that's, that much more uncomfortable. But nobody will tell him, no, you can't just kill people. No, you can't just call the bone saw guy. You can't just kidnap entire states, whatever. But it's not working. So once they got away from the president, Kushner did call Murdoch. Miller tried Salmon but couldn't reach him. Other Trump aides pitched in. Kellyanne Conway reached out to Bayer and McCollum, who were on the air. That's hard to get through. I would think Hicks, how does she do it? Well, she had worked under Lachlan Murdoch at the Fox Corp between her White House stints. Remember that she left at one point? Anyway, she reached out to Fox Corp Senior Vice President Raj Shah, a former Trump spokesman, to track down a number for Jay Wallace, the president of Fox News. Conway talked to Brian Sitchik, a longtime Trump advisor based in Arizona, who assured her, this is irresponsible. Here in Arizona, we have way too many votes left to count. And hey, they still think they're counting them out in Arizona. All right. Well, anyway, I think you get the sense of what's going on. And then eventually, I guess they do just take drunk Giuliani's advice and they walk out and he says, we are winning. But Trump does we were winning, but then all of a sudden it was just called off. Literally, we were just all set to go outside and celebrate something that was so beautiful, so good. Trump rattled off states he had won. Florida, Ohio, Texas, and those he did. And then claimed that he had already won states that were too close to call, including Georgia, which he didn't, and North Carolina, which he did, I think, right? He bragged about his leads in some states, like Pennsylvania, and falsely claimed to be winning Michigan and Wisconsin. Anyway, you know what happened with that. Let's see if there's any more stuff here. Oh, okay. Let's see. So then Trump goes on to make his crazy speech for the night. This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We are getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. We did win this election. So our goal now is to ensure the integrity for the good of this nation. This is a very big moment. This is a major, I love it when you use major fraud on our nation. We want the law to be used in a proper manner. So we'll be going to the U.S. Supreme Court. We want all voting to stop. We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list, okay? It's a very sad moment. To me, this is a very sad moment. And we will win this. And as far as I'm concerned, we already have won it. Of course, the big lie right there, born an extraordinary accusation, as they say, for any political candidate to make about any election, much less for a sitting president to make about the country's most consequential election. Trump was telling the 74 million people who voted for him not to trust the results. Watching from California, where he was actually living, as opposed to Utah, where he represented, Romney was heartsick. He makes a blah, blah, blah anodyne comment. Pelosi watched Trump's speech in horror. It was just a complete, total manifestation of insanity, she recalled in the interview. But, no one would ever say this at the critical moments. Just us. And then we would end up finding ourselves banned from Twitter for saying such horrible, awful things about a sitting president. How could you possibly do that? All right. So there you go. There's a little bit more detail to go on, but I don't think any of it was really unknown to us. Just sort of setting the scenes, because that'll be the next couple of days' discussion, I think, now that they've decided to excerpt their book, recalling all of the things that they should have told us contemporaneously at the time. Still not loving this trend. Okay, other things to share with you. There's plenty. Let's do the dry stuff of the budget and reconciliation news segment for the day, since we're going to have that on our plates, and Joan will be joining us at the end of the next hour. We can at least lay the groundwork so that we can just have our chat and we don't have to spend too much time on the background. I grabbed this from Roll Call, total shift of the feeling of the show here, but this is actually the news part. Budget blueprint for massive spending package starts to take shape. We're still a long way from getting this done. Wow, an extended Coke can drum solo in the background there today. Coke can didn't want to give it up, right? All right, fine. Here's your soda. Senate Democrats, White House officials to meet again Tuesday, that's today, as they seek to make key decisions this week. So they're going to have a meeting and seek decisions. Isn't that great? Lindsay McPherson will update us for roll call. Senate Dems hope to reach agreement as soon as this week on the top-line spending and revenue numbers for reconciliation instructions that they plan to include in their fiscal 2022 budget resolution. Budget Committee Dems huddled late into the night on Monday with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and White House aides Brian Deese, National Economic Council Director, and Louisa Terrell, I'm not certain how she pronounces it, Legislative Affairs Director, to discuss the budget reconciliation package they plan to use to enact most of President Joe Biden's economic proposals. We're still aiming at this, do the big stuff via reconciliation plan. Senators leaving the meeting just after 9 p.m. Monday. Their day starts early, so that doesn't seem so late, but for them it's kind of late. They said the group plans to meet again Tuesday evening, tonight, as they work to finalize an agreement on the spending and revenue targets. We certainly want to get it done as soon as possible, just because it takes time, the whole process of writing things, says Debbie Stabenow, Michigan senator, a member of the budget panel and Democratic leadership. And Chris Van Hollen from Maryland saying there's a very decent chance that the committee and Schumer will reach an agreement in their Tuesday evening meeting that they can present to the broader Democratic caucus later in the week. Once an agreement is reached on spending and revenue targets, the figures would be turned into instructions to various committees to flesh out into implementing legislation for Biden's climate change and care economy plans. I don't think I've seen the phrase being used, but they they quote it here as though that's what they've been labeling it. I have, largely ignored that. But all right, now we'll get used to some of the phrasing that they're using. But yes, maybe some of you actually remember the reconciliation process that the Budget Committee will come up with very generalized figures. Well, ordinarily, even without the use of reconciliation, they're just handing to the various authorizing committees and then later on to the appropriations subcommittees. This is how much money we're allocating for each various budget function. You can determine which programs within those top-level functions get how much of this money. But that's what's going on. Then, of course, instructions to the various committees that they want to report the important stuff that they will put into a reconciliation bill later on. So, where were we here? Those directives to the committees will be the central element in the budget resolution, which itself is non-binding, but allows the use of reconciliation. You all know why that's important. It helps avoid the Senate filibuster. That's critical because Democrats want to pass trillions of dollars in new spending on child care, education, paid leave, and health care programs that Republicans don't support. Senators leaving Monday's meeting said they made progress but have not yet reached agreement on any spending or revenue numbers. They declined to say whether they've moved off the $6 trillion 10-year spending target that Budget Chairman Bernie Sanders previously floated, or narrowed the gap between that and a lower ceiling that centrists have posited should be somewhere between $2 and $3.5 trillion. So no word there who's prevailing. The 11 Budget Committee Democrats, ranging from progressives like Sanders and Rhode Island's Sheldon Whitehouse to centrists like Virginia's Mark Warner, are looking to reach an agreement among themselves on the budget resolution and reconciliation instructions before pitching it to the entire caucus. Senators left the meeting with different ideas about when an agreement on top-line numbers would be reached, but the consensus seemed to be that coalescing around numbers this week would be ideal, as the Senate races to adopt a budget resolution and pass a bipartisan infrastructure bill before departing for August recess. We'll see about that. Senator Jeff Merkley from Oregon said the goal is to have an agreement on the top-line numbers by Thursday, though Sanders declined to commit to that timing. Earlier Monday, Sanders met with Biden at the White House to discuss the budget reconciliation process. He emerged from that meeting predicting that the Senate Dems will reach a happy medium between progressive and conservative senators' demands to get the 50 votes needed to advance a budget resolution. Sanders said after his meeting with Biden that he was still working off the $6 trillion proposal he pitched weeks ago, despite others in his caucus saying they couldn't vote for that much new spending. People have their different points of view, and we're going to work it out, he said. Although, of course, he said, people have their, his voice. We're going to work it out. So I can't do a Bernie Sanders this morning, but horrible disaster, that much I can always summon. But not the rest of it. Okay. After the meetings in Schumer's office Monday night, Sanders declined to offer specific figures, but said there was widespread agreement to work toward a multi-trillion-dollar bill that would be the most consequential piece of legislation for working families in the modern history of this country. That's fantastic. That sounds great. Anyway, that is not easy to do, and we're working as hard as we can, he said. Van Hollen said the Monday discussions focused on various elements of what would go into the reconciliation package, like climate, healthcare, education, and workforce training. The group was trying to sort through everyone's conception of what it means to actually make a significant progress, or to make significant progress in these issues, he said. Merkley said senators discussed adjustments that they felt needed to be made to Biden's proposals. Warner declined to comment on the meeting other than to say the group made great progress. Schumer said he and the budget panel members had a great discussion. Everyone's moving together, he said. Schumer said in earlier floor remarks that the committee was close to finalizing a budget resolution, but after Monday night's meeting, budget members said they've not even reached a final decision on whether the reconciliation package will need to be fully offset with tax increases and other savings. It doesn't, but they might decide that they want that window dressing. Sanders, Van Hollen, and other Democrats argue that one-time spending on things like infrastructure could be deficit financed. I think that's a really legitimate point, Stabenow said. To me, we've just got to pull it all together. These kinds of large negotiations, of course, are never done until it's all done. To that point, an agreement among the 11 Budget Committee Dems likely won't be the final product, as other senators not on the panel, like Joe Manchin, will want to have a say. One thing the group did not discuss was the debt limit, lending further credence to predictions that Democrats would try to tackle that through regular order. The debt limit is not part of the overall discussion, Van Hollen said. It'd be much easier if it was. Stabenow said the debt limit hasn't been discussed yet, but that's not indicative of a final decision, not to try to raise it through reconciliation, so at least the door is still open. Complicating the drafting of a budget resolution is the two-track approach Democrats are taking on infrastructure spending, the first track being that bipartisan framework on so-called hard infrastructure. That'd be roads, bridges, water, and broadband projects. That counts as hard because Manchin is behind it. Well, that's not guaranteed to result in legislation that 60 senators can support. We're proceeding on the expectation that we'll have a two-track process, Van Hollen said, but he acknowledged that the fate of the bipartisan bill is uncertain, especially as Republicans are raising concerns about the offsets. Susan Collins, who's deeply troubled, one of the senators that negotiated the framework, said there are a lot of issues that remain to be resolved. One of the revenue raisers in the bipartisan framework some Republicans have taken issue with is increasing the IRS budget by $40 billion over 10 years to step up tax enforcement. Remember, it's interesting that they're even discussing that as a revenue raiser as opposed to a cost center there or a spending measure. The bipartisan group predicted that spending would net $100 billion in revenue over the same period, but that has not materialized in the CBO's analysis of the proposal, according to John Tester of Montana. They're charging for the additional IRS spending, but not the money coming back from the additional enforcement. At least that's my understanding, said Tester, a member of the bipartisan group developing that infrastructure bill. Nonetheless, Tester predicted negotiators would figure that out and work through the other issues this week. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Plenty of other things to jump into and share, but I think that gives us a good background on where we supposedly stand with the reconciliation bill and the two-track process. Maybe something Joan wants to spend some time on, but now we're covered in case she wants to spend her time on other things, including the judges that she remembered we wanted to spend our time on. Thanks very much, Joan, for having an actual memory. It's appreciated. Let's see. Other news. Just want to note for the record, looking at Jim Roberts tweeting on the COVID situation over the last couple of days, noting for the record that down in Tennessee, they have fired their top vaccine official as COVID-19 shows signs of new spread. She says she was terminated to appease state lawmakers angry about her department's efforts to vaccinate teenagers. Keep in mind, this is Tennessee. What this means is they're not firing her because she's been too slow in vaccinating teenagers. They are firing her because she's trying to vaccinate teenagers and more people, and they are anti-vaxxers, and they want her to stop trying to keep people from catching the disease and spreading it elsewhere and overwhelming the hospitals, which, of course, is supposedly the goal we've been working on for like a year and a half now. But whatever. She's actually, I guess, somewhat close to accomplishing it. Tennessee is kind of stabilized of late, but just like everybody else, they're experiencing some Delta strain surges. Roberts' next tweet reads that in her words, Tennessee's former top vaccine official says it was my job to provide evidence-based education and vaccine access so that Tennesseans could protect themselves against COVID-19. I have now been terminated for doing exactly that. That's not real good. And he punctuates the whole thing with a list of COVID hotspots, the usual actors here. Florida, Tennessee, Louisiana, etc. But in no particular order here. He lists them with the percentage of increase that they've seen in caseloads. This is the 14-day change in average daily cases, according to the New York Times. Florida at a plus 222%. So up 222% over the last, the 14-day change in average daily cases. And that's, they're literally at the top of the list, but not the highest number. The highest number actually goes to Tennessee, where they just fired their vaccine chief. 404% increase in daily average cases over the last 14 days in Tennessee. Louisiana posting a 218% increase, and see if you can find any sort of theme in these states. Florida, Tennessee, Louisiana, Kansas, 173% increase. Mississippi, 172%. Missouri, which has been topping the list lately, only posting a 68% daily increase over the past 14 days, but their numbers have been pretty terrible. Arkansas, 124%. And now come two states that break the mold. Illinois, 154%. California, 130%. And then Oklahoma, back to the mold, 127%. So some lousy numbers there. Missouri being the best of the bunch. But that's possibly because Missouri has been leading the list for the prior 2-week period, I would guess. And, the virus has eaten the low-hanging fruit there and is spreading out from there to eat what's available in some of these other states. That's what I'm guessing. Mississippi, a correction here. Mississippi, not 172%, but only 159%. Alabama, previously not listed there, but now added in his correction, 172% increase. So I'll share that with you, and you can take a look at the Tennesseans write-up of the interview, I guess, with the vaccine official, whose name I don't know. Maybe I should click through just to get that. Dr. Michelle Fiscus. Not, I guess everybody wants to fire the people whose surnames begin with F here. Fiscus. Dr. Michelle Fiscus fired on July 12th amid questions on youth COVID-19 vaccines. And she gives her explanation. Probably not a bad use of our time to read through that, but a little specific, I guess. Let's move on to a couple of other interesting tidbits here. Let me jump back to Haiti, because things are still not clear about what's going on there. And then I'll see if we can't add a few more quick hits here. CNN reporting yesterday in this already confusing situation, several tied to Haiti assassination plot were previously U.S. law enforcement informants. Sort of a seedy world, of course, not terribly surprising. But between this and a New York Times piece, U.S. investigators, says here, arrive in Haiti to aid in the Moise, I forgot the pronunciation already, Moise murder case. And between these two pieces, the New York Times is the longer and more involved here. It's emerging that, remember yesterday we found out that it was alleged that the people involved in the actual assassination itself might have been hired through a Miami or Florida-based security company. And it's now beginning to emerge that there may have been a plot by some private individuals who I guess had, I don't know based on what, but some claim on an interest or being able to actually establish an interim government in their own name. So that, somebody actually might have pulled this off, not in retaliation for something in particular that they just wanted to strike out at the president for, but rather as part of a coup attempt to take over the government of Haiti for themselves. The shorter read here, I think, also touches on this weird angle, that being the CNN discussion of those being tied to the assassination plot being law enforcement, U.S. law enforcement informants. Evan Perez writing this piece for CNN. Several of the men involved in the assassination of Haiti's president previously worked as U.S. law enforcement informants, according to people briefed on the matter, as U.S. investigators grapple with an increasing number of Florida links to the alleged hit squad. Haitian President Jovenel Moïse was killed last Wednesday in an operation that Haitian authorities say involved at least 28 people, many of them Colombian mercenaries hired through a Florida-based security company. At least one of the men arrested in connection with the assassination by Haitian authorities previously worked as an informant for the U.S. DEA. The DEA itself admitted in a statement made to CNN. At times, one of the suspects in the assassination of Haitian President Jovenel Moïse was a confidential source to the DEA. Following the assassination, the suspect reached out to his contacts at DEA. A DEA official assigned to Haiti urged the suspect to surrender to local authorities and, along with a U.S. State Department official, provided information to the Haitian government that assisted in the surrender and arrest of the suspect and one other individual, the DEA said. The DEA said it is aware of reports that some of the assassins yelled DEA at the time of their attack. The DEA said in its statement that none of the attackers were operating on behalf of the agency. I should hope not. Other suspects also had U.S. ties, including working as informants for the FBI. The people briefed on the matter said. The FBI said in response to CNN's reporting that it doesn't comment on informants, except to say that it uses lawful sources to collect intelligence as part of its investigations. Authorities on Monday announced the arrest of a suspect who they say orchestrated the assassination. Haitian-born Christian Emmanuel Sanon, 63 years of age, entered the country on a private jet in June. Police Chief Leon Charles said at a news conference. Haitian authorities say Sanon, I guess this pronunciation, Sanon, had hired the Florida-based company CTU Security, which they alleged recruited men initially to provide security for Sanon, though their mission appears to have changed thereafter. It certainly does. He came to Haiti accompanied by a few people in the beginning of June. These people were supposed to ensure his security and his business, said Charles at the news conference. He came with the intention, though, to take over as president of the Republic. So, I mean, I don't know if that's a legitimate business agenda. But I saw him elsewhere identified as a Haitian American and a doctor, perhaps, and living in Florida. But then, from June, he took off to Haiti and brought a private security force with him. And apparently somebody, it was open enough that somebody knew that he came with the intention of taking over as president of the Republic. No, I haven't read the reporting as to why he believed that was a possibility yet, but it's out there somewhere, I'm sure. 2 Colombian suspects who were killed in Haiti by the police also had links to CTU Security, which is owned by a Venezuelan national. We read about that yesterday. They have requested assistance, or rather Colombian police have requested assistance from the U.S. Interpol office to investigate the company's data. It's not clear that the men who worked as U.S. law enforcement informants wittingly participated in the assassination plot or were aware of the mission, the people briefed on the matter said. CNN has not been able to reach Sanon or his representatives for comment since his arrest. I would think that would be difficult. A delegation from the U.S., including representatives from the State Department and Department of Homeland Security, returned from Port-au-Prince on Monday and briefed President Biden. Biden said later on Monday that he was closely following events in Haiti and that the U.S. was ready to continue to provide assistance. Haitian authorities have provided limited details on the investigation, but the growing number of Florida connections to the plot appears to portray an operation at least partly hatched in the U.S. 3 American citizens have now been arrested in Haiti for their alleged involvement, according to State Department spokesman Ned Price. That may increase the likelihood that the U.S. Justice Department could bring charges against any of the U.S. participants in the plot. On Monday, the Justice Department said It would investigate whether there were any violations of U.S. criminal law in connection with the assassination. Senior officials have conducted an initial assessment, and the department would continue assisting Haitian authorities in their investigation. And that's the conclusion of this particular piece. But, I want to thank Andre Kimball, who has been corresponding with me via the Patreon messaging system. Gave us the Miami Herald piece that we read yesterday, and just sort of commenting, and I thought this was interesting too, now that we know about the not only the Colombian but Venezuelan connection, the Venezuelan ownership of, or alleged ownership of the security company. Andre was just saying, I found it interesting. I remember you, that being me, discussing on the show the failed coup in Venezuela last year, and now this. And with the old comment of, you can't make this, we'll say, stuff up. You can't, but the new corollary to you can't make this up is you don't have to, because there's plenty of people doing all of it for real, even if you can't believe that it's actually happening in this world. But okay, just sort of wanted to keep you up to date on how much more confusing the situation in Haiti is becoming. But a couple other things I wanted to share with you as well. Let's see. Including this interesting story headline here from the Washington Post. Let's see what we got here. The Republican Party's top lawyer called election fraud arguments by Trump's lawyers a joke. That's a quote, a joke that could mislead millions. And lo and behold, it has done exactly that. Yesterday, while we were conducting our show, we noted, for the record, I guess Pocket has changed the way that it opens up stories now. So trying to work around that. But we noted that the hearing in Michigan wasn't going very well. And I told you we would have a write-up for it, but it turns out that the write-ups are very long and involved. But Talking Points Memo had a running commentary on it. That's one that we might want to take a look at, or I'll certainly share with you, just to see just how badly the hearings went for the Kraken lawyers yesterday. But I guess a mark of that is that we're seeing reports in the Washington Post of top Republican lawyers who really basically did nothing to put a stop to any of this. Now, I guess, trying to distance themselves from it by saying, I knew it was a joke all along. This is Justin Reimer, or Reimer, R-I-E-M-E-R, the RNC's chief counsel, apparently, one who said this, and he sought to discourage a Republican Party staffer from posting claims about ballot fraud on RNC accounts, according to an email trail discovered by the Post reporters, as attempts by Donald Trump and his associates to challenge results in a number of states, such as Arizona and Pennsylvania, intensified. What Rudy and Jenna, remember, what's her name? Jenna, Ellis, Jenna Ellis, the traffic court lawyer who ended up as Trump's top attorney and all of this stuff. What Rudy and Jenna are doing is a joke, and they are getting laughed out of court. Reimer, whatever, a longtime Republican lawyer, wrote to Liz Harrington, a former party spokeswoman, on November 28th, referring, of course, to, well, you know, to who he said, Giuliani and Ellis. They are misleading millions of people who have wishful thinking that the president is going to somehow win this thing. It may be that he, actually contemporaneously felt that, but then November 28th is still late in the game. He probably should have been speaking up earlier, but that's just, I just want that on the background. The more interesting, I think, discussion was the updates over at Talking Points Memo. They did a whole live coverage thing on Trump's team Kraken is taking it on the chin in the sanctions hearing. I feel like I wish I had seen that thing live. That reminds me of, that there's at least a forum still available in this country where, like, actual facts and rationality can sometimes take hold and shake these people. if not out of their disillusion, then shake them hard and send them to prison afterwards, although we have yet to see. I mean, prison isn't in the offing at the moment for these guys. This is just a disciplinary hearing, and there's still some chance that they may say, well, they really believed it, whatever. But they certainly had a hard time yesterday, and it's good to see them have to argue their case in a forum where there's a judge willing to say, no, shut up, you're an idiot, enough with this. What's your evidence? Well, the Constitution. That's not evidence. That's not. Just, do you have anything to say here? No? All right, good. Duly noted. Now, we still haven't heard what's going to happen to them, but it was fun and refreshing to see that being discussed yesterday. Let me see what they have for the rundown, and whether they do this in reverse chronological order. They do. But the top line bit here, U.S. District Judge Linda Parker, that's her whole name, now we only had Judge Parker yesterday, for the Eastern District of Michigan, holding that hearing yesterday on whether or not to sanction some of the loudest propagators of the most brazenly absurd conspiracy theories around the election. Parker denied a request from attorneys Lynn Wood, Sidney Powell, and others to have an attorney represent them at the hearing. So on Monday, the top pro-Trump attorneys who sought to cast doubt over the 2020 results appeared over Zoom regarding a measure of accountability over conspiracies about a stolen election. It ends with the last entry here, then dated 2:35 p.m. yesterday. But let's see how far down we have to scroll in order to get to the good stuff at the start. It's quite a ways, but let's share some of these things. Oh, load more. Okay. Well, to give you a flavor for some of this stuff, maybe we should just read it backwards, because I don't know if we'll get to the end if we do it this way. But, well, let's give it a shot. Man, this does go on. And it's not that easy to just get to the beginning. You got to do it, one click at a time. But I know that, they started that hearing pretty early, and I guess it was on at like 8 a.m. Eastern time, and it went on until noon. This won't take that long to read, but let's take a look. The whole Kraken team shows up for a sanctions hearing. The gang's all here, says Josh Kovensky, who's writing all these fun updates. He keeps them brief. Wood and Powell's co-counsel is in attendance. Stephanie Juntilla, Juntilla, Juntilla. Gregory Roll, Scott Hagerstrom, Julia Holler, Brandon Johnson, and Howard Kleinhendler. All the people who embarrassed themselves trying to represent these idiots yesterday. As is Donald Campbell and his co-counsel Patrick K. McGlynn, also representing the Kraken team. Detroit attorney David Fink is arguing for those seeking sanctions in the case. So Fink is the good guy here, I guess, at least for these purposes. The judge wants all the details on who brought forth the Kraken. Parker wants to know everything about the who, what, where, when, and why of the so-called Kraken complaints, which alleged, among other things, that the 2020 election was corrupted by fraud. My first question to plaintiff's counsel, who wrote the complaint? Parker began by asking. Lynn Wood chimed in. Remember this from yesterday. I played absolutely no role in drafting the complaint. Parker went on to ask whether the court had any authority whatsoever to deliver the relief that the complaint sought, which was, of course, decertifying an election. And, the answer to that is actually no. Judge Parker has needling questions for the plaintiffs. Why, if all these fraud allegations are so true and so urgent, did it take you more than 3 weeks to file your complaint? Kleinhendler, a Kraken attorney, replied, it wasn't until the voting was counted, until the scope of what many people perceived to be irregularities was understood. The judge also asked, you told the SCOTUS one thing and me another? Parker asked the Kraken attorneys just now about an assertion that they made in their brief to the Supreme Court. December 14th filing, the Kraken said that the subsequent relief would be pointless and the petition would be moot. If the plaintiffs already knew the relief they sought was moot, why did they continue with the lawsuit? Campbell, answering for Kraken, says, because my clients are lawyers and they have a duty to advocate zealously for their clients. Okay, you see, it's not going all that well. But the Kraken has an answer to Parker's next question. The fake slates of GOP electors, never legitimized and never chosen, reinvigorated the Michigan lawsuit. And that, Campbell explained, is why it was possible for the Kraken to say that the lawsuit would be moot before SCOTUS, but continue in Michigan. The competing electors created a controversy that, quote, reinvigorated the lawsuit, but Parker not having it. I've never heard this explanation about there being some reinvigoration about the electors being elected, in air quotes. I've never heard that. Campbell, in response and to utter silence, I've never heard of a federal judge using air quotes. Well, that didn't go very well for him. Fink, an attorney attempting to slay the Kraken, says Wood, Powell, and others did not dismiss the lawsuit after January 7th when the election was certified, and instead their next motion was on January 12th, and on that date they asked for an extension. This comes after Campbell, the Kraken attorney, kept interrupting the judge to the point where Parker had to tell him directly to stop talking. Kleinhelder, also working for the Kraken attorneys, is trying to get the last word on the argument over whether the complaint was moot. The fake GOP electors from Michigan, he argues, were real because they said so. All 16 electors, Michigan electors, appeared before the Capitol that they weren't allowed in, and they decided to hold a vote. That is based on their rights under the 12th Amendment. Parker, though, bringing the discussion back to reality, whether to sanction the Kraken. Do you believe that a lawyer has a legal obligation to review the plausibility of the facts alleged in the pleading before signing it and filing it? She asked Campbell. He said yes, because he couldn't answer any other way. Parker is now asking which lawyers read which affidavits filed as part of the lawsuit. Lynn Wood, of course, saying, I didn't do anything here, but he is the Kraken promoter-in-chief, as Kovensky says here, with his name smack dab on the Michigan complaint, now denying any involvement. I didn't read it before it was filed. I generally indicated I was amenable to it, but I would be available to help Sidney Powell. But he apparently is trying to claim that he was surprised that his name was even on there. Fink, for the defendants, pointed out here that Lynn Wood was served by mail and email in the lawsuit, broadcast on social media regularly his involvement in the Michigan suit. Any other representation by him is blatantly false. Fink went on to point out that Wood had tried to burnish his credentials in a separate Delaware lawsuit by referencing his involvement in Michigan. So, yeah, not really going to fly here. Parker calls out Lynn Wood on his attempt to wriggle out of sanctions. Sidney Powell saying that Lynn Wood gave permission for use of his name. This is interesting. The judge says, tell me about Spider, S-P-Y-D-E-R. Judge Parker wants to know about Joshua Merritt, a.k.a. Spider, the anonymous military intelligence expert that backed up some of the Kraken team's wildest claims. We read about him being the white hat hacker hired by that group that worked out of the airport hangar in Texas. Well, Kleinhelder says he's keeping up the shtick here, declining to reveal the identity of Spider because the source is a confidential federal informant. He trained with the 305th, whatever that's supposed to say. Kleinhelder says gravely he offers to brief Parker privately, but not in a public setting. Parker then goes through all the affidavits and wants to know who read what and who signed what. Kleinhelder now asking for Spider to be allowed to testify in a bid to stop sanctions. Judge continues pushing. You can see that it's just not going well here, and we're only up to like 10:44 a.m. So I'll share it with you. You can read for yourself since our third break is coming up, and at this point we'll want to jump back to let Joan in and discuss what's going on her agenda, happening on Capitol Hill, etc. But it's very interesting to read. It would have been very interesting to watch live and comment on, but I don't know if we could have made a coherent show out of it. But the best write-up, I think, is the minute-by-minute recap offered by the Talking Points memo folks. Because really, what was so fantastic about it, from what I was able to glean from everybody tweeting about it, was it was just great to see these people taken out of the press conference setting where they can just make any sort of ridiculous claim that they want and put in a courtroom setting where a judge can shut them up and sanction them on top of all that. I really hope that comes to pass, but it was fantastic to see them debating in a forum with some real rules for once. And I imagine it was a nice thing to see it happen. All right, well, we've got that to share, and, plenty more that we didn't get to today, but who knows where we'll go in the rest of the week. Joan McCarter coming up next, so keep things tuned right here for that. Well, let me open up her page over at Daily Kos so I can follow along on what's been on her agenda, and maybe we'll even get a sneak preview of what's coming up that you and I haven't been privy to yet, because, I don't know, she's making it up right now.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We've got Joan on hand. Everything under control. You have a little bit of hectic activity just before joining.
I just, you know.
just the regular. Okay.
Yes.
No big deal.
But we're fine now, and we are here.
Yes, okay, everything's fine. As long as you're here, that's all that really counts. We can hear you. That's the good news. By the way, for those interested in the Kraken hearing from yesterday who might not have time to wade through the blow-by-blow description over at TPM, there's a very fine summary of everything in regular, like you can actually read it in a couple of minutes, story form. Carrie Elveld has posted earlier this morning. If you're looking for it, it's under the title of "It's Hard to Believe, but a sanctions hearing on the baseless Kraken pot lawsuit was a disaster." So, yeah, not that hard to believe, obviously. It's just a joke. But if you're looking for a more digestible, quick hit on just how satisfying it really was to watch these idiots get hit over the head by a gavel, Carrie's got your number. Yeah. So
It was very distracting yesterday. It was hard to keep up with your other work because watching the Twitter feed of the various lawyers following it, live tweeting
it really was amazing.
Very distracting.
It was so entertaining just watching people saying, I can't believe a lawyer is saying this in front of a judge. It was that kind of a hearing.
I can't believe it's that easy for some people to get law degrees.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them just have kind of like lost their mind along the way. I mean, there was a time when the Kraken lawyers were, they were always showboats, but they were legit lawyers at one point. And
were they? Really?
Kind
all
of weird. I don't know if not all of them were, but the big names, Lynn Wood, as crazy as he is, had a career. It was a splashy, dancing on the edge of insanity kind of a career. And Sidney Powell, to some extent as well. And it's, I point that out only to remind people that, what their trajectory has been. And I was reminded of it actually by watching the other day, Jonathan Turley tweeting about, I don't know what he was tweeting directly about or in anticipation of this sanctions hearing or what, but basically doing a Kraken style or a defense of the team. And I know he's been in a downward slide for a while, but like if you want to see it happening in real time, Jonathan Turley is a chaired professor. Yeah. And I mean, we all watched what he did during impeachment, but I guess I just thought it was performative, contrarian stuff to get his name in circulation, but he's really plummeting down the Linwood, Sidney Powell, Kraken hole here.
Glenn Greenwald.
Yeah, yes. I mean, that's right. You're 100% right. There was, a time when they could put together a coherent argument about things, and I don't know what exactly did it, but it's weird, and I guess it's infectious, and we should be working on an mRNA vaccine for it, because I don't want to get that. It's like a zombie disease. Kill me before I get to his point. Wow.
Yeah, I remember, a decade ago, more than a decade ago, having some discussions with Glenn Greenwald that were productive.
Yeah, I mean...
where he was making very good points about executive overreach in the Bush administration.
Yes.
And against torture. And he...
I don't know.
Well, anyway.
Yeah. Oh, of course, I remember having some conflict with him even at that point,
yes.
too. But what was interesting to me was that the conflict was about him saying, oh, you're exaggerating how bad these authoritarians are.
Right.
Well, geez.
Right.
I mean, that's a conservative, cautious approach to things. And then just, he went bananas. So it can happen, and it does spread, and I guess it's contagious. And I don't know whether it comes from what you read or what, but I mean, Jonathan Turley is, like I say, tenured professor at GW. He's teaching, there's students
which
he's
is
responsible
very
for.
scary.
Yeah. I don't know. Well, anyway.
Like we didn't already have the Federalist Society to deal with. Now we've got...
Right. Now we have a Q version of Federalist Society on top of it all. So, yeah, we may be
Which
in
is a nice segue into what we were going to talk about last week, but didn't have time.
All right, then. Let's do it. It was
Judges. Yay!
Right.
Because Biden and Schumer are actually doing a pretty good job of getting them nominated and getting them actually seated. In fact, there are going to be some more nominations considered on the floor this week in the Senate.
That's good. Yeah, I like that. And, of course, no filibuster in the way of those guys. And I guess, does this mean that we're not dealing with blue slips again? I never really did see a resolution of what that was going to be, but I guess if they're moving...
Durbin was going to disregard or not use blue slips for appeals court judges, but still consider it for district court judges. And I don't know, whether we've had the issue of district court judges in Republican states come up yet.
Okay.
Whether that's the issue or what. But at any rate, Biden had more confirmations before July 1st than we've seen in decades.
Okay. Well, good.
He had 7 judicial confirmations by July 1st this year.
All right.
If it's not Supreme Court justices, it's at least the feeder courts to the Supreme Court. We don't know what's going to happen there, of course. It appears that our friend Breyer is not going to step down. He's not going to retire.
Yeah.
So we don't know when we're going to have another seat on the Supreme Court open. And we don't know whether, we're going to be able to fill that seat.
Right.
Depending on how the midterms work out next year. So, anyway.
Yeah.
What he's doing now is really good, including some nominees who are extremely diverse. A lot of women, a lot of civil rights lawyers, a lot of public defenders, younger folks, not all of them, but a lot of them. A few corporate ones have pushed through, but certainly it's not all been corporate, which is great.
Okay. Yes, that's a big
Or
change.
prosecutors. Yeah, that's another big one. Another big feeding job into the judiciary. So he's really working hard to diversify the courts and all credit to him for that. And Democrats for recognizing that needed to happen.
Yeah, because that wasn't an obvious change that they were going to make for years. I guess maybe decades even. Democrats have followed that pattern of, well, essentially one of trying to find judges that weren't going to cause controversy. Although for most of that time there was a filibuster in place that would have stopped or could have stopped controversial nominees, but not even, well, nominees about whom a controversy was created.
Republicans decided to make controversial.
Right, there we go. Because very often they were the furthest thing from controversial because they were, in fact, they had eyes on joining the federal bench or moving up on the federal bench, and they were carefully cultivating their careers, curating their careers so that they wouldn't be controversial, but it didn't matter, and Republicans called them controversial anyway. But yeah, one of the ways that they sought to avoid controversy was by saying, well, like we're seeing a revival of this thing again, unfortunately. Well, Democrats want to demonstrate that they too can be tough on crime and will nominate prosecutors, right? As opposed to, there are two sides to criminal prosecutions, or rather criminal cases. Criminal
justice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Isn't there a famous television show that talks about the two sides of things? Anyway. Right. If I could just remember what it was. But yeah, it really threw things out of balance for civil rights and for criminal procedural rights as well, because even the Democrats who were being nominated as more or less liberal judges came from a prosecutorial background. And there's valuable input to be had from people who deal with defendants all the time. Mm-hmm. So you're right. Great. I'm glad to see something happening there, and a serious effort to put that forward. Even if there's not the exciting ability of clearing a new Supreme Court justice at this moment.
We've seen what they've done with the Federal Society, how important, though, these district and appeals court judges are for the agenda of the president.
Yeah.
Whether that's fighting it, as the Fifth Circuit has been doing, and that crazy Reed O'Connor in Texas, doing everything in his power to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. We've seen what the power of these judges is to set the agenda for the Supreme Court.
Yeah. So super important, and glad to see them working on it.
Which remains a scary place.
Yes, no doubt about that.
Which still needs to be reformed. There's another out there with Reed O'Connor Affordable Care Act case that's troubling.
I almost thought we were done, but no. I guess not.
No. No. I mean, the Supreme Court might be done. They might just say, all right, enough. We're just not going to do this anymore. But Reed O'Connor in Texas is still going to try, so we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Well, it's a good point. The court may, at some point, just say, all we do is this thing. It's constitutional, guys. The end.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll see. We'll see whether Justice Thomas's wife lets him do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Any other
speaking of that, did you see Axios's report on what Trump said about Kavanaugh?
That rings a bell, but
that was kind of fun. That was kind of from yet another book that's coming out. Yeah. A different one than what you were talking about earlier.
Okay.
This is a new Michael Wolff book called Landslide.
Yes, okay, that did get mentioned, but so Kavanaugh?
Trump says, where would he be without me, Brett Kavanaugh? I saved his life.
Really?
He wouldn't even be in a law firm. Who would have him? Nobody. Totally disgraced. Only I saved him. Only I. Only I.
Delusional on a number of levels, not the least of which is he was a D.C. Circuit Court judge for life without you.
Yeah.
Where would he be? He'd be drinking at a baseball game and happy, I think.
Yes, he'd have a beer in hand.
Yeah. I mean, I'm almost enough to make me feel bad for Brett Kavanaugh that his life's been ruined by Donald Trump, but, well, let's see. I don't think I did. We didn't note that on the show, that's for sure. I don't know. That was totally unnecessary, but
he's still upset that Kavanaugh didn't vote with him on his election. And he did try. We will say that in one of the early cases, Kavanaugh sort of tried to leave a window open for Trump to contest the election.
Yeah. But, yeah, I wonder what he would say about that if he were free to talk about it. Because I think, I guess it would be like, I left the door open, but, I mean, you have to have good lawyers. You still have to have a good lawyer to win a case.
And you still have to have a leg to stand on.
Yeah.
It was pre-election, one of the decision, I can't remember which, it was a Pennsylvania case, I think? I don't remember for sure. I'll have to go back and look it up.
It's starting to come
back. I did
back
write
to me.
about it. But yeah, Kavanaugh did sort of leave a Bush v. Gore door cracked for Trump, provided he had a leg to stand on in terms of the actual ballot count and having halfway decent lawyers.
Yeah. Yeah, I think now it's starting to come back to me that it was maybe about the question of whether or not it was constitutional for the Board of Elections to change voting procedures.
That was it, yes. Yeah.
And I mean, that was at the heart of their constitutional claims. So, I mean, leaving the door open to it was extraordinarily dangerous. You just needed to find people who could formulate an argument as to why the Constitution's definition of the role of the state legislature in setting the rules was this expansive reading that Republicans wanted, as opposed to the very simple and straightforward black letter of the law thing that conservatives usually argue for when they're talking about original intent. So yeah, he gave them every opportunity, but they hired Kraken lawyers to do the work, and that just doesn't work. You got to get somebody serious. And I'm sure Kavanaugh's like, I don't know. I literally laid out a red carpet for you, and you guys just wandered off drunk with Rudy Giuliani. I can't argue the case for you.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, Trump is not going to forgive him.
Fine. What do I care? Good.
He's not happy about Gorsuch and Coney Barrett, according to Michael Wolff in his book, but he really, really, really hates Kavanaugh.
Okay. He just really thought they would just award him the Nobel Prize and give him free food for life or something. I don't know.
He said as much, essentially, when he nominated Coney Barrett.
Yeah.
Said, this is, she's going to keep me in the White House. Essentially.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and he wasn't talking about indirectly. He thought that they I guess now we know, if he's mad with those three, he just really thought they would just say, I don't know what the reason is. It's just, I hereby find that he's president. Court's adjourned.
Right.
Well, surprise, it doesn't really work that way. For a guy who's spent so much time in court and has been so uncomfortable there in the past, I'm surprised that he thinks that these things are doable. And why doesn't he think, with all my money, how come I've never been able to make the law really actually go like that? But I guess on taxes,
because the system is rigged against him.
Yeah, that's it. Even though, the whole reason is who he is that the system is in fact rigged in favor of him, but the civil side, I guess. And now he's a criminal, and he finds it's actually quite difficult. Oh, well. Well, that is remarkable that he's actually mad with those guys. I don't know. There's just never enough for him.
He's very disappointed in him.
Right. Okay. Well, it's too bad.
He really did go off. Practically every senator called me, he said. I said, cut him loose, sir. Cut him loose. He's killing us. Kavanaugh. I said, I can't do that.
Right. The people who could impeach a justice are calling me saying I should cut him loose. Right. That's exactly what
this could be another McConnell thing, because, of course, Kavanaugh was a McConnell. Wasn't he? Am I thinking of a different one? I'm thinking of a different one.
I don't know. Was he involved with McConnell? Was he on staff? Is that what you're thinking? I don't know.
That was a different. It was a different one.
Okay. Well, they're all pretty much coming
Walker
from
was
there.
the one. that I was thinking of that had been an intern and family friend and I don't know what all.
Well,
So anyway, yes.
all much the
He
same.
hates Brett Kavanaugh, so join the club,
Great.
Donald.
Yeah, right. Sure. Fine. Why not? I'm sure Kavanaugh's not. Although, I don't know. Kavanaugh's pretty volatile. Maybe that'll get to him. I don't know why it should, but if it upsets him, fantastic. That's just a bonus for me. I can't do anything about it. All right. Any other judge material? I think we've kind of caught up with the important bits.
We've caught up with the important part. Yeah, they're still doing really good work on judges. So thank you, Harry Reid.
Yeah, that was well done. And
people keep bitching about how all of this, the reason why we have those 3 Supreme Court justices is because McConnell took Reid's lead, the precedent he set, and got rid of the filibuster for Supreme Court justices.
Yeah.
But if we look at the lower court, yeah, it's a good thing that Harry Reid did that.
Yeah.
So
most of the work is done there, so. You know.
And that this is another instance in which the Biden administration learned from the Obama administration. Because in the first whole term of Obama's administration, he did not prioritize getting these seats filled.
Yes.
He let a lot of them just sit vacant for Republicans to then block. So, that's another important lesson learned by Biden from that administration. It's not letting that happen again.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm glad that it's working at least on that front.
What it doesn't mean is that it's still not really important to get more seats on those lower courts as well as on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, that still apparently scares them. But I could see that there could be an argument, well, we ought to fill the seats that actually exist that are vacant before we start asking for more. But by the time you do that, then it'll be too late. So you might hint at what you would like to do later on.
Well, and then we've got, of course, Mitch McConnell threatening if they get the Senate back next year, there aren't going to be more Biden judges.
Right. They would put a stop to that. Well, they're being very forthright about it, and you just have to. Yeah, what do you know? Eliminating the filibuster brings issues directly to the fore, and people will be presented with a direct choice about which direction the country ought to take, and maybe decide accordingly. It might not be such a bad thing.
Might not be such a bad thing.
I hate to lose it.
And that kind of, sort of, takes us to Texas Democrats.
Okay.
Kinda.
I'll allow it. To speak like a judge.
Who have...
Great.
I hate to say fled this state because what they did was not fleeing. What they did was preventing a special session in order to enact horrible voting restrictions. To fly to D.C. to lobby the Senate to finally get rid of the filibuster and pass the For the People Act so that states like Texas can't pass more egregious voter restrictions.
Yes. I saw
and
that.
It's almost looking like this was kind of something planned. Because Biden today is making a speech on voting rights.
Okay.
And because they decided, yes, they're taking chartered planes to D.C. where they will meet with Democratic senators, and Democratic senators were there ready to greet them and tweet about them, and it almost looks like this was coordinated, which, yay, Democrats.
Yeah, like that'd be great if it was. It happened very quickly, and we knew that the Texas Dems might very well be forced to do something like this, but I guess as late as yesterday, I think. In the morning, I thought I saw Beto O'Rourke suggest, all right, well, if they're going to leave the state in order to prevent a quorum for passing this terrible bill, they ought to use their time in D.C. and assemble on the steps of the Capitol and lobby for getting some protection via filibuster reform. And then they did it. So the fact that it happened inside of a day, I thought, that's a good idea, but he's proposing it too late. But I guess they actually had something planned out after all. I can't imagine that they all woke up and read his comments on Twitter and said, yeah, here we go. Because that's a lot of senators and a charter and all that stuff. So they knew, I guess, at some point, even if not, last week necessarily, that they were going to do this. But it's a great plan to highlight the issue and a good opportunity for probably some fairly conservative Dems maybe to show up and get an opportunity possibly to talk to the holdouts in the Democratic caucus here, just in terms of, I know you want there to be a bipartisan agreement on this stuff, but here's what is going on in the states, and you can relate West Virginia, Texas. You probably find that easy to do. Here's what's going on down there. There's no bipartisanship in passing these things. I'm here because there's none.
And you would think that would be a particularly easy case to make for Sinema.
Yeah.
Whose very state provided the case for the Supreme Court to get what was left of the Voting Rights Act.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, think that might sort of sink in with her, considering she's up for re-election in 4 years. Yeah. 3 years now.
I mean, I don't expect things to change this week, but I wouldn't be surprised if they got a couple, if they made an effort to have some private meetings and just say, look, I know you can't go out there and announce a total reversal, but I do want to tell you what's going on. What you might
see is something that's resurfaced in discussion yesterday, a carve-out of the filibuster for voting rights. And that's sort of back in the mix again as something that they're considering.
I mean, all right. I don't object. I mean, I kind of really at bottom baseless, but what do I care?
Yeah. Do something.
Right.
That's fine.
That's what comforts you.
It's an important something.
Yeah, right.
Because unless everybody can vote in 2022.
Yeah. I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, I only say baseless because you can just make that excuse about anything that you want. But yeah, that's the point. You actually can make the rules be pretty much whatever you want. Just so long as a majority is required to do the thing that you want. That's the one rule you can't break, unless it's a presidential election. In which case, go ahead. So, all right, that's weird, but okay. I'm glad to see that happening, and we read a little bit this morning. We gave the background so that you don't have to unless you want to. What's happening with infrastructure and reconciliation and budget?
Yeah, it's Infrastructure Week. I don't know whether you brought up the fact that, surprise, surprise, Republicans are getting wobbly.
No, but they are.
Yeah. 5 or 6 of the Republicans who supposedly, and I really doubt this was ever true, supposedly supported the bipartisan framework. Are saying, well, yeah, maybe not so fast. Which, if you didn't see that coming, you have not been paying attention to Republicans for any length of time at all.
Yes.
I see it entirely as more of their efforts to delay this as long as they possibly could. They now see that Schumer and Biden are intent on trying to get something done this month before August. And here's their chance to, maybe not. We got to see this. We got to see that. So I'm hoping in all of their discussion on reconciliation and what they can get into that package, they're leaving room to dump in all of the stuff from the bipartisan bill.
Hope so. Yeah, I wonder.
Or more, actually. The stuff that Biden wanted originally, as opposed to what the
what Republicans
my
would
words
allow,
are failing me. What the Republicans, along with the moderate Democrats, have done to it, which is slash it.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if that ends up helping, possibly, and now the possibility that Bernie Sanders, saying, well, I'm still sort of thinking about my $6 trillion, but I'd be open to cutting it back. But maybe if they cut it back so that they could then say, well, now that the bipartisan package, all the Republicans have turned tail and run, we're going to take some of that and put it into reconciliation. And I can still fit it inside of the $6 trillion I was originally discussing.
Yeah, I
think
it's smart for Bernie to stick to the $6 trillion for as long as he can.
Yeah, and he now can offer it as a compromise. I had 6 trillion of my own ideas here, but instead we'll do 3 trillion and make 3 trillion worth of room for all the things that you guys thought you were going to get in a bipartisan package, but you were wrong and you couldn't do it. But I'll save you. Come on in, together with us.
It'd be a nice move. It would be a really nice move.
See if it can happen. And we'll know by next week. Probably not, no. But at the end of this week,
not, but possibly.
We'll hear about what's happening. And you've been pushing for them to put off recess and get it done. And they're starting to talk about at least reducing their recess. And maybe that'll work.
The Senate is anyway.
Yeah. That'd be fantastic.
As of now, the House is still it's going to be gone all of August until the 20th of September, so,
yeah.
Well, that's probably going to change.
Ah, okay. Well, we'll keep an eye on that. They may just be in the position of saying, well, let's see what the Senate does, and then we'll, if they deliver, we'll do the same. All right. Well, very good. We'll check in again next week. Thanks for coming by today, and thanks for remembering that it was about judges. There was just no way I was going to do that.
I don't know how I remembered.
I don't know, but it was fantastic. Well done. We'll speak again next week. Let's promise something right now.
From NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, well, that was probably the smart thing to do. Decline to promise anything because that would only create expectations. But you can expect this, another great discussion with her next week, and we'll see what kind of progress we've made. For now, though, we'll see what kind of progress we've made around the country and around the world with Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next. Stay tuned.